Okay, so now we're going to look at who is the EEOC, what are they, and let's look at some of the items that you need to be aware of under the discrimination laws and what complaints can come under the different categories that they can come under. So the EEOC is an arm of the US government. They're an agency, and their job, like other agencies, is to enforce the law. And the laws that they enforce are the discrimination laws that prohibit employers or people that work for employers from discriminating against other employees. Now, there's 13 of these items that are covered, and we're just going to go through the list really quick, and I'm just going to highlight some ones that you may not be aware of because a lot of the other ones are going to be self-evident. And again, this is not a legal course. I encourage you to go to their website and read up on these. They have whole page descriptions of what these are, what constitutes it, what doesn't constitute it, all that good stuff. And it's something that you probably should be aware of. And again, remember, awareness is the goal here. This is not a legal course. This is an awareness course, so you know what to be aware of, what you're subject to, okay? So if you look at this slide here, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission enforces federal laws prohibiting employment discrimination. This can be unfair treatment based on all of these, and you've heard all of these: race, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, disability, genetic information. Okay, they also talk about harassment, and they describe what harassment is, denial of reasonable accommodation, and retaliation. So these are, any one of these is something that you can, an employee can file a complaint on and allege that they were mistreated because of one of these items. So I want to just highlight a few that you may not be aware of. So this is the list of the 13 items covered, and most of these items come from basically three laws. They come from the Civil Rights Act of 1964. They come from the Age Discrimination Act of 1967, or Anti-Discrimination Act, and they come from the American with Disabilities Act of 1990. So as you look down through this list here, what you see is things that are kind of self-evident. You can't discriminate against age. You can't discriminate against someone's disability, national origin, sex, race, okay, color. But I want to point out two of them that are in particular. One of them is called harassment. And harassment is unwelcome conduct based on one of these items here. It can be offensive jokes, it could be slurs, it could be threats. These are things that happen in the workplace, and this is why, if you watch my other training videos, I constantly preach, as a leader, as a supervisor, you have responsibility to make sure these things are not occurring. And if they are occurring, it's your job to get them to stop occurring, okay? Because you can be charged, they can charge you with harassment for allowing these things to go. So that's one of them. The other one I want to point out is the one called retaliation. And I'm going to show you some stats in a few minutes here on the complaint types that are getting, how many, which ones make up the top 5. Okay, I think you're going to find that very interesting. But retaliation is a special kind of complaint because what it says is that once somebody files a complaint, regardless of whether anything's done with it, regardless of whether they find fault on the employer or not, once someone files a complaint under one of these categories, then they are protected from retaliation by the company, by the supervisors, by other employees, okay? So if they're retaliated against in any way, they don't have to show, again, it was age discrimination or sex or race, whatever. They can just say, I made a complaint, then I was retaliated against for using my rights to file an EEOC complaint. And this is going to be a bigger one than you think. So keep that in mind as we go through this, this course. Now, who is covered? Well, if you're a business, now this is who is covered by the EEOC agency. If you're an employer and you have 15 or more employees, the EEOC covers you. In other words, if there was a complaint made, they could investigate the complaint. You're big enough for them to do it. If you're with the federal government, obviously they cover all federal government. If you're state and local, the EEOC won't get involved unless there's 15 or more employees, but a lot of state and local governments have their own sections, their own civil rights sections that would investigate these types of complaints. And a lot of states have similar laws that would enforce these types of discrimination laws. So, and if you're your own employer, the fact that you have under 15 does not really mean anything because people can still take private action in court against these items. So the bottom line is you may be covered differently. The EEOC is going to cover you if you're over 15 or federal government. But the bottom line is you don't want discrimination happening in your workplace. You want your folks to feel good. You don't want an environment where they feel like they're being harassed or they're being discriminated against or they're being treated unfairly. You want to do your best to make sure that you're complying with these, you're treating everybody fairly, regardless of whether the EEOC would investigate you or someone else. Because I'm just going to tell you, it doesn't matter who would be investigating you, whether it's court, state, local, EEOC, it's not going to be a pleasant experience, especially if you're found guilty of breaking one of these rules. So just keep that in mind. Okay, when we talk about the time to file a complaint, we're looking at the same thing. There's going to be a few differences here. Normally, generally speaking, 180 days from the day the discrimination took place is the timeline. For federal employees, it's 45 days from the date the discrimination took place. Now, looking at this, you might think, well, those are pretty short time frames, especially in the federal government. It's 45 days. That's it. So technically speaking, based on the law, if a complaint comes in 60 days after an alleged discrimination, it should immediately be thrown out in the federal government and not investigated because it wasn't timely. Same thing for the 180 days. Okay, I'm here to tell you, and this is what I'm going to do some training on later in this course here. I'm here to tell you those timelines, take them with a grain of salt. They're flexible, okay? I had a complaint once on an award. One employee was complaining that he did not get an award, and he complained that it was based because of one of these categories that I discriminated against him, that another employee in a different category, different race, got an award and he didn't. Now you say, well, Steve, that sounds like a legitimate complaint. It is a legitimate complaint. The problem was it was filed 3 years after the award went out. Okay, this is what I'm going to get into later in this course and the importance of records and keeping good notes on what you're doing. The EEOC allowed it in because the employee argued that he did not find out about it till 3 years later. So they allowed it in. Lucky for me, I kept good notes. I kept good notes on who gets an award and why they got an award and what their performance was going years back. So I was able to overcome that complaint, but it's just a heads up that these time frames are not set in stone, and any EEO judge can authorize them to go back further than these dates if they think it was warranted. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the top 5 categories of complaints. You're probably wondering, okay, how many complaints do they get a year, the EEOC? And what types of categories, like of these 13 that we showed you, which ones make up the majority of complaints? So it's really good, interesting information. I'm also going to show you how they resolve these complaints, what percentage gets resolved, what percentage results in findings. So let's look at that right now. All right, so let's start looking at the top 5 types of complaints that the EEO has received. This is from their data, right off their website. And because I want to show you some trends on the total number of complaints that they're receiving, and I also want to show you the number of complaints that they're receiving in specific categories. And I think you're going to find the top 5 very interesting. So let's start with number 1 here. And this is retaliation-based complaints. So let me show you a couple things about this chart here, because you're going to see it for the next 5 slides, just to show you where we're at. So the top part of the chart here with the darker blue, these are the total number of complaints that the EEOC received during that year. So in FY 2017, for example, they received 84,254 total complaints. At the bottom of the chart, you're going to see the specific complaints received in that category. So the category we're looking at right now is retaliation-based complaints. And this is the number one type of complaint that the EEOC receives. You can see the numbers along the bottom there for retaliation-based, and the numbers on the top represent overall complaints. Another thing I need to point out is that you're going to see that the numbers at the bottom sometimes seem very high compared to the total number of complaints. The reason that is because a complainant can make a allegation in many different categories. They can say it's sex-based, retaliation-based, and race-based. The EEOC counts that as one complaint in each of those categories. Even though it's only one complaint, it gets logged in 3 different categories. So some of these numbers at the bottom may seem really high compared to the overall total, but that's why. So one of the first trends you're going to see here on these charts is the total number of complaints the EEOC has received during the last 5 years, or up till 2021, has steadily decreased from 84,000 to 61,331. Now, I could not find any explanation on their website on why they've decreased. We hope that it's indicating that discrimination has been reduced and is going down. There's obviously less complaints coming into the system, but I can't tell you exactly why those numbers have gone down the way they have. I hope that's a good trend. I hope that's a good sign. So this is number one here. This is retaliation-based complaints, the number one type of complaint they get. And in 2021, the EEOC had 34,332 of these types of complaints. So let's move on to the top 5. Let's go to number 2. There we go. The number 2 type of complaint that they receive is disability type complaints. So again, at the top of the chart, we have the same numbers, the total number of complaints that the EEO received. These are their charts, by the way. These are just printed right from their website. And at the bottom, again, we have the numbers. So these are the total numbers here, 22,843 in 2021. And as you can see on these disability complaints, they've gone down somewhat, but not a whole lot. Even though the total number of complaints has dropped, if you look at this line down here, these have remained fairly, they've gone down a little bit, but not a whole lot. So this is number 2. Let's move on to number 3. Number 3 are race-based complaints. And again, if we want to get that number, it's 20,908 for the last data point that the EEOC has available. And this comes in as the 3rd highest complaint that they receive in their database. Let's move on to number 4. Number 4 are sex-based complaints. And these totaled to 18,762 in FY 2021. And again, as you look at the bottom here, you can see these have gone down a little bit more than maybe some of the other ones have. And rounding out the top 5 are age-based complaints. And these come in at 12,965 in 2021. So those are your top 5 categories of complaints that the EEOC is receiving in each of these years and the numbers that go along with them. So I hope you can see that the total number of complaints have dropped. The specific categories of complaints has dropped, some a little bit more than others, and that rounds out the top 5 for us. So the next thing we're going to look at, now that we've looked at the top 5 and the total numbers, what are the resolutions to these complaints? What do they find? What happens? So what I did is I picked the top 3. We're going to look at the top 3 now of the complaints, and we're going to look at what kind of resolutions came out of those complaints. So we'll go back. Number 1 was retaliation, and these are the resolution of charges that the EEOC completed from 2016 to 2020, and there's 3 different data points for each year. The dark blue chart there, the dark blue line represents no reasonable cause. And what that means is that The EEOC can't determine whether a violation occurred or not. They just don't know. They can't determine it. But the charging party, this is what you need to know, the charging party can still bring private action in court. The EEOC just says, we can't do anything with this. We don't know. Okay, so that's the one line. Now the other two lines, the light blue and the dark red, these are where there's something else, there is something going on. So the light blue line represents closed for administrative reasons. And what the EEO says on these are that they're not making any determination on the merits, but these were resolved somehow. They could have been a settlement. They could have been a mediation. We'll talk about what these are and how the EEOC resolves these complaints. They like to do mediation. They like to do settlements to fix the problem and everybody go along their way. And so those could involve those types of settlements, but they're not making a determination on the merits. On the dark red line, they are making a determination on the merit. The charge was resolved with favorable outcome to the complainant. So these are the three data points that you're going to see on all these charts. Now, a couple of things that I noticed. So we're looking at retaliation, all right? That's the number one complaint they received from 2016 to 2020. And so these numbers, we lost you there. These numbers right here are important, these light blue and the dark red, because that tells me that something's going on there. The blue is they couldn't really find anything, but the light blue and the red means there's something there. There's something that was worked out or charged. And as I look at those numbers for retaliation, and then we come back over here, and you're going to see this on most of the top three, what you're going to see is that although the total number of charges has been going down, the charges that they do get, they're very consistent in how they're resolved. I mean, there are some slight changes, but when you look at the numbers from year to year, in 2016 to 2020, they're being very consistent in what they're doing and what they're finding with these charges. So keep those numbers in mind. These are around 18% for 2020. Let's go to number 2 and see what that one. So number 2, if you remember, was disability-based complaints. And again, we're looking at 2016 to 2020. So again, these are the blocks that we're looking at. Now you can see that the merit resolutions on these is a little bit higher than the previous one. And again, when we look back and we look through the years, the EEOC is being very consistent in how they resolve these complaints. So these are the resolutions for disability-based complaints. Let's take a look at the last one, which is race-based complaints. Now, what I noticed on this one, there's still consistency across the board here, but what I noticed was the resolutions on these are a little bit lower. The light blue and the red, the merit resolutions and the administrative closures are a little bit less. The other ones like 18%, 20%, these are around the 13% mark. And they've kind of stayed that way for most of these years here. So just kind of some interesting data there. So those are the top 5. Those are the numbers. I hope you see that we're still talking a lot of numbers. Even though they've gone down, we're still talking a lot of numbers. And the EEOC is still being very consistent in how they do resolve these complaints and when they make findings on these complaints. So that's very important to you and your company. And that's why we're having this course, so you understand the process and your employees and you can learn how to work better with folks so you don't appear in one of these numbers. You don't want to be in one of these numbers. It's not a good thing. Okay, so now that you have a little understanding of the types of complaints they receive, the volume, and the different categories they're in, let's talk about resolution. So how do they resolve complaints? Well, the EEOC prefers to resolve complaints through mediation, if possible. And what they do is they bring in a mediator and you work with the person making the complaint and they try to mediate a solution that's agreeable to everybody. It could be to stop the discrimination or whatever the charge was. It could be to provide some type of accommodation for someone who's disabled, or religious accommodation or something like that. So they prefer to do mediation when they can. They also do settlements, and settlements are a little, I'd say, a step up, where maybe the person is requiring some back pay or something like that, or the agency agrees to do something and they want it in writing as a formal agreement, so it's a little more formal than an informal mediation. They can also do court if they have to, if they can't solve it through settlement or mediation. And one thing you got to remember, and I experienced this quite frequently, is in the federal government, it was the employee's determination how they wanted to proceed. Many times the agency was willing to mediate, but the employee was not. And if the employee doesn't want to mediate, you don't have much left but either a settlement or going to court. And unfortunately, a settlement sometimes involves admitting guilt, and if the agency was not at fault, they weren't prone to settle cases that they thought there was no discrimination. So be aware of that. Now, it can go to court, and they can take you to private court, like I said. Most of the time, once they file a complaint, they must get EEOC approval to take it to private court to enforce some action. It's called like a right to sue from the EEOC, so they would need to get that. But they can also take you to EEOC court, and the EEOC itself can file a lawsuit. I myself went through 2 EEOC courts, actual trials, where you're going in just like a regular person would be tried with a jury. These are with a judge. The judge is the decider, but you go in just like it's just like a regular trial. We had our attorneys, they had their attorneys. I had to sit on a witness stand. I had to be questioned by this person's attorney on various aspects of the case. I had to answer under oath. I had to give depositions, all that stuff, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But it's quite the process, and you feel like you're on trial. I'm going to tell you, when you go to one of these trials, even if you felt you've done nothing wrong, you feel like you're on trial, and you are the one that has to prove your own innocence. So there's quite a lot involved in the resolution process, especially if you're going to defend yourself or your agency is going to defend itself and dispute the charges, and the complainant does not want to mediate or does not want to settle. It could end up in an EEOC court, and that's quite involved. You'll definitely need counsel if it goes to that level. So some of the remedies the EEOC can ask for, they can ask for obviously to stop the discrimination. If they find discrimination at the end of the process, they can tell you got to stop doing this. This is discriminatory against new applicants, or whatever the case may be. They can also ask you to reverse the discrimination. If you weren't hiring people because of a certain sex or gender or something like that, they can ask you to reverse that and start hiring those types of people. They can award attorney's fees, court costs, punitive damages to the complainant. They can also give awards for emotional harm suffered to the complainant, stress, heart, or whatever they went through during the process to prove that they were being discriminated against. That can also be awarded by the EEOC. And they do limit these awards and these emotional harm suffered and all their remedies. They do limit them by the size of the organization. I was in the federal government, so there was no limits on what they could ask for or get in any case. But in the private sector with smaller companies, the EEOC would limit it based on the size of the organization. So I hope you got a good feel of the categories of complaints. I hope you got a good feel of which are the most prevalent or the top 5 and how they resolve these complaints and some of the remedies and some of the resolutions that the EEOC will engage in to resolve these complaints. So I talked about going to court. I talked about the stress of that. Well, next I'm going to talk about the complaint process itself. I'm going to give you some examples of the types of complaints that I received in my job, and you're going to be very surprised at some of the ones I had to deal with. We're going to talk about that. We're going to go back to that, to the start where you got that email from the EEOC investigator, okay? We're going to go back to there, and we're going to start walking down through the process of how it would probably most likely flow if you got one of those complaints. And again, remember, I was in the federal government. They had one system. If you're in the private industry, different company, they may have another system. But it's going to be it's going to be probably similar. And I think I'm going to give you some good things to think about there, and some good things to remember to help you get through that process if you should have to go through it. So that's next.